Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and today I am talking about resin soap dishes, specifically pouring resin. This is not the first resin soap dish that I made, but however, I lost the footage for the first attempt. The first attempt I tried to pour clear resin with a little bit of purple and white swirls with some glitter sparkles thrown in, but I didn't really like how that turned out, and I will be showing you that later. But as I can't find that footage anyway because of a lovely delete glitch, um, I'm just going to show you me actually pouring the second one. I decided for the second one that I wanted to do just purple and white resin. And this resin is a 50-50 epoxy resin. So what that means is that for every 1 part of resin, I use 1 part of hardener. These typically come together in a bunch of kits, and I have to mix it. So you're going to watch a lot of me just mixing the resin at this point, um, because you have to actually make sure that it is mixed thoroughly. Resin of this type works by having a chemical bonding between the resin and the hardener. And it takes a full 48 hours for my specific resin to fully cure because cure time is actually um, the chemical reaction. And the full chemical reaction takes a full 48 hours to completely finish happening. Now, this resin is safe to actually unmold after 24 hours, but you still wind up with about 8 to 16 hours where it's still a little bit tacky and it's a little bit too soft to unmold. You can wind up leaving it to sit out and it might misshapen itself because of gravity. So you want to make sure everything is fully mixed. I start off with just the clear resin and then I add color later. So I stir for a grand total of about 2 minutes and then I add color and stir until it is thoroughly integrated. I started doing this um, actually before I started doing soaps. I liked the idea of it, but most of what I was making were like little dongles and things for jewelry. And I only make so much jewelry at a time. I love the colors, I like doing that, but I don't wear a lot of jewelry. A lot of people I know don't wear a lot of like big beaded jewelry. And I've had two necklaces on my Etsy shop for forever that nobody's purchased. And so it's just not a big mover for me. So I don't make it too often. But I like making useful objects. Sorry, I knocked the camera there. One of the really cool things about resin is that you can make things like coasters. This was actually a mold originally from a coaster set. It has 4-star coasters. And then this base, actually, those little indents right there, those stick things on the mold, that is where you're actually making indents in the base so that you can stick the stars so they stand up in the base. Um, However, that's not really what I got it for. Those are 5-inch stars. They're really big, too big for soap, but I loved this base as a soap dish because those ridges, if you manage to completely cover them, create great little drainage ditches for soap when you've used it and you want to put it on something. And this way, you're not going to wind up with a bunch of uh, water leaking around the side of your sink. As you can see, I have added some white liquid resin dye. I don't know too much about it. I got it from Michael's, I believe, but I do know that it is safe for resin. Resin colorants are actually not too different from um, soap colorants. The liquid one is completely different. This is not a skin safe liquid colorant, but this is one that is specifically safe for resin. And I am using the same purple mica that I used for the soap and the sugar scrub cubes from previous videos. And I had to mix this. Now, resin, just like soap, does not like mixing with powders too particularly easily. They can clump. I had to take it off for a few minutes to make sure that everything was fully incorporated. I also don't really measure, but I do notice that the mica powder mixed with the resin tends to be a little bit heavier than the liquid dye, and it has a tendency of sinking. In my first attempt, in addition to the actual soap dish, in that round mold up to the right, I had actually made a coaster out of just the white and purple resin that remained. And the purple resin did this really interesting thing where it sank. It created this really interesting uh, color pattern, and I'll show you that when I show the original unmolding from the first attempt. Now, something I learned from this attempt that I'm not going to show because, it does take 24 hours to cure between attempts, and it was just getting a little bit long. But something that I'm going to do in the future is instead of doing big pours of color, I'm going to do smaller pours of color. Just mix up enough resin to cover like a single thin layer in the bottom of the dish. And then I'm going to pour so it looks like a little bit more clouds. I'm going to make a lot more white resin than purple resin. And that way, you're not winding with just one huge splotch of purple amongst all of this white. It's actually going to have a chance that you're going to see some white interspersed with the purple. This happens this way because the purple sinks. Um, you wind up with the bottom, which will become the top of the coaster because this is poured upside down. You're not going to see this side that we're seeing now. So I really wish this mold had like a top or something so that whatever wound up on top could wind up on top of the actual dish, but that's not how these things work. So having to factor in that color sink and that color spread, I think is going to be very important for future endeavors. Now, I'm not saying I don't like this one, it's just it's still not turning out quite the way I envisioned it, and I'm being a bit picky. But I still think it looks rather nice as long as you don't mind kind of flat purple edges between the little ditch lines, as I like to call them, mostly because I'm not sure what to actually call them. So also in my first attempt, I had a little trouble with those ridges and I forgot originally to actually cover them. So right now you can see that I am pouring more um, resin on top so that way I can completely cover the ridges. Because if you don't cover the ridges, you're just going to have these weird holes in the middle of um, the soap dish. I'm also using my little popsicle stick to just kind of swirl in some swirls in the pattern. Unfortunately, because of the sinking, this isn't going to matter like at all. And I accidentally poured a little too much and I wound up with a overflow. Now, I try to clean it up here, but not well, as the resin settles and there is a chance for the surface tension to break, you could wind up with further overflows. Now, this is my actual first attempt after it was completely dry. It is much paler, but it's not paler because of more white. It's paler because of the clear resin. Um, the sparkles were sunk into the bottom, which becomes the top of the soap dish, which is why you don't see anything initially. But as you can see, the sparkles were not quite the right color for that shade of purple, but you did wind up with the ditches that were covered on the back as I had intended. Um, this those ridges are very good for catching water and making sure that your soap gets some airflow from the underneath so everything can dry between washes. If you give it enough time, of course. Um, Resin epoxy is basically plastic, so it is firm, but I would not rinse this off with any super hot water for too long because it will soften. And if it does soften and warp a little bit, all you really have to do is set it down and kind of push it down a little bit and it'll return to its original shape. Um, you can, well, this is me using it for soap and that's basically all you do. You can also use it for lotion bars or sugar scrub cubes or little hair ties or anything that you really want. Now there is an upper ridge to it that will prevent water or anything from leaking out, but it's not too high. And this is the pattern of the sinkage from this coaster. It's pretty cool and kind of a tortoiseshell thing, and it wound up sinking in an interesting pattern on top. And if you look real close, you can see the sparkle of the mica in the purple. Now, this coaster is really cool. You can actually put, that's perfect for the lotion bars because you don't need holes in the bottom for the lotion bar. They never get wet, at least in theory. You never know with kids or pets. But um, if you do wind up using either of these as a coaster, which is totally possible, just remember not to put any hot drinks on it. The resin will soften and it might stick to your hot container. So, not good. But these ridges are really, you can see here that ridge up top, so water isn't going to just splash out the side. Not unless you have a lot of water, in which case, what are you doing to your soap? So, yeah, that is the first attempt. It has grown on me over time as I've had it in my house. I was not too keen on some of the kind of empty spots between the ridges and kind of around some of the edges. And I really didn't like the color of the sparkles. It really wasn't the aesthetic I was going for. But this is one of the options. I am selling this on Etsy. Now, this is how my second attempt turned out, and I love this black hole effect. I really wish this was the top of the soap dish. And honestly, if you want to, you can use this as the top of the soap dish. Um, the pattern is quite lovely, and it kind of shines. That purple really shines well. Now, I did have a bit of an overflow as you can see, but it breaks off nice and easily. And then I'm just going to sand the edges there so that way they're not sharp and nobody can accidentally get hurt. No, there were no sparkles actually in this one. That's just left over from the first attempt. And as you can see, we have sinkage. I still think it's pretty cool. It looks kind of like a purple cloud. Future iterations are going to have far less purple and far more white. And I'm going to do it in many layers to hopefully create more of a 3D cloud effect. But yeah, this and the first one are very similar because they are from the same mold. It's the same resin. And look, it also works for soap. Now getting that mold out of there. And that is a silicone mold, in case you're interested. Um, this is everything in the Relax Pack. So now we got the obligatory upsell. The Relax Pack is a concept I have of creating a perfect bathing experience to kind of treat yourself. And I have been making videos. This is the second to last video in a series where I am talking about, I'm actually showing you how I make all the different parts. I made lavender soap, I made lavender rose lotion bar, night lavender sugar scrub, and Delilah fragrance body spray. This is the resin soap dish, and I'm going to be making 2 more items in one video because I'm not really going to show those items because they are a knit washcloth and a crochet basket to hold everything in. And although I think watching these things being made is interesting, I realize my other channel, the one where I do knit and crochet items, would be more appropriate to actually show you how I make it. But I'm going to talk about that in more detail in my next video. Happy crafting!